welcome to our Reimagine Life, Loss, and Love virtual festival event about kicking the bucket list, downsizing, and organizing things to do before you die. If you don't know who I am Gail Rubin. The CT stands for Certified in Thanatology. And thanatology is the study of death, dying, and bereavement. And do you know where we get that term thanatology from? It's the Greek demigod Thanatos, who has a twin brother, Hypnos, which is sleep. And Thanatos is the demigod that represents a gentle death. So sleep and a good death are very closely related. So here's a question for you guys. Do you feel like you have too much stuff around your house?
Yes.
Show of hands.
Yes.
Maybe you've got a partner and maybe that partner's got too much stuff around the house.
Yeah, blame it on the cat.
Cats can be pretty messy. Well, here's a question. Where do you see yourself in 100 years? A lot of people don't think about that, but chances are it would be
Buried.
in the cemetery. And you know, you can eat right, you can exercise, you can put on your mask or not and go out and breathe in somebody's face. Despite great advances in medical care, we all have a 100% mortality rate. You will eat all of that kale for nothing. And yet, despite this, less than 30% of adults do any end-of-life planning. So that's wills or trusts, advanced medical directives, and pre-need funeral planning.
Less than 30%?
Less than 30%, yep.
Wow.
It's usually between 25 to 30%. So that means 75% or more of our loved ones are going to be scrambling to pull together information and make expensive decisions under duress of grief. And it doesn't have to be that way. One of the other elements that come into play here is that when we talk about our stuff, our material goods, very often that ties into our perceptions of our own mortality. So what we'll be looking at here is starting out with talking about our attachments to our material goods and how that then transitions over to planning ahead for end-of-life issues. Some of you may or may not know, I am the author of this book, A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die. It came out in 2010, and in fact, I'm working on an update because a lot's happened in 10 years in the funeral business. The story behind this story is I was not always the doyenne of death. I actually come to this field from a background in public relations and event planning. And I got married for the second time in 2000, had a very creative Jewish Western wedding. Can you tell I like Western wear? And everybody at our wedding had such a good time. I wanted to write a book about creative life cycle events and call it Matchings, Hatchings, and Dispatchings. And I got to write a monthly feature in our local newspaper about weddings and births and deaths. And it was the stories about death and funerals that got the most reader response. And I realized, you know, there's already plenty of creative wedding planning books. We don't need another one of those, but there wasn't much about creative funeral planning at the time. And it's interesting because in 2010, there was a great deal of beginnings of conversations around death discussion. We saw the start of the Death Cafe movement in 2011. Dying Matters Awareness Week was already going on in the United Kingdom. We have Before I Die festivals now. So 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of this conversation happening, but as I say, a lot has happened in the past 10 years to help us start talking about this. And of course, the Reimagine End of Life Festival, which is now a virtual festival thanks to how we find ourselves in our homes, thanks to the coronavirus pandemic. So that was my first book. I've written two others. One is called Hail and Farewell: Cremation Ceremonies, Templates, and Tips. And the book that brings us here today is Kicking the Bucket List: 100 Downsizing and Organizing Things to Do Before You Die. So my start with A Good Goodbye actually changed the course of my career. I focused on becoming a certified funeral celebrant. I got the certification in thanatology. I do blogging, I do YouTube videos. I actually did a television interview series, also called The Good Goodbye: Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die. And I'm actually recognized now in the funeral industry as a pioneering death educator who, bless you, who is helping to get conversations started. My motto is, just like talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals and end-of-life issues won't make you dead. And I've been doing this for 10 years, so far so good. But of course, I do have my plans on file for whenever, because we do have a 100% mortality rate. So what we're going to do today is go through a couple of the points in this book. This is a very simple book. It's 100 points, and each point has a photo with it, some information, and links to websites. So we'll walk through a few of the slides, the photos from the book, and the first 2/3 of the book are about downsizing, creative ways to downsize. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then we'll switch gears in the last third of the book and talk about all of those important planning ahead for end-of-life issue topics. Sound good?
Mhm.
All righty. So number 100, we start at 100 and we go to 1, is release your attachments. Now, I'm guessing most of you will recognize that that is the Buddha, an iteration of the Buddha. And the Buddha said that attachments are at the root of all suffering. So that includes physical attachments to things, and those are usually tied to emotional attachments. If any of you have watched the hoarding programs, very often the hoarding starts when someone that person loves dies. But hoarding and holding on to objects or people or negative emotions becomes baggage that weighs you down. And it takes you away from being fully present in the present moment, which is really the only time that we actually have. And being present is very important, especially during such a stressful time we are living through right now, because fear projecting into the future, regret projecting into the past, takes us away from where we are right now, which, when you look at what is actually right in front of you, generally speaking, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's a quote that I'd like to share with you. A guy named Thomas Winninger is a professional speaker, and he's been sending me emails on a regular basis. And he did a paragraph in one of his emails about attachments that I'd like to share with you. The more one is attached to the things of the world, the more unhappy that person will become. Attachment means that one cannot live without, that one is in fear of losing, and that one is defined by that to which he or she is attached. So releasing your attachments makes you a stronger person in the process. Another part of attachments is all of that stuff can become clutter, and clutter is stressful. Just like multitasking, it overloads your brain. Well, clutter overloads your senses and it causes you to feel stressed out. I mean, think about it. When you look around and if you've got piles of books or papers and other items cluttering your counters, that visual chaos fosters mental chaos. So when we clear our clutter, we can clear our minds. And some of you may know about feng shui, the Oriental art and science of energy flow. Well, clutter is an energy flow killer. So we want to clear that clutter and allow the good energy to flow throughout our homes or our offices, wherever we're spending our times, which can be both this day and age. This is an actual drawer in my office. Well, how it used to look. I actually have an approach. I call the Gail Rubin dump a drawer approach to downsizing. One day I was trying to find something in my desk drawer, the all-important left-hand drawer, you know, where I keep the postage stamps and notepads for writing notes and other things. But I was looking for something in particular, and it was so clogged with clutter, I couldn't get anywhere. So out of frustration, I took the drawer out of the desk and got a cardboard box and dumped everything in the drawer in the box. And then I picked through and pulled out only what I needed. And then also discovered I had a lot of like promotional items that had kind of built up in the drawer. Didn't need it, just boxed it all up and donated it. Now, let me see. No, I didn't show you the after shot. The after shot was very clean, but unfortunately, like a river and silt in the river, clutter tends to build up again. And in fact, this drawer is not as clean as it doesn't look like that anymore, but it doesn't look, you know, nice and spare and open like it did after I cleaned that drawer out. So you can do a small piece of your environment at a time. Do it drawer by drawer, cabinet by cabinet, closet by closet, room by room. And depending on how cluttered or when the last time you visited that area of your home, you know, it could be a bigger job that needs to be broken down into smaller time chunks. Speaking of time, you know, you could do this, you know, scheduling 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, giving yourself a deadline. If there's a holiday or a big family event coming up, that can be a good way to work towards your downsizing goals. Many of you may have seen the Netflix series with Marie Kondo and her KonMari method of downsizing. That is that's more object related. She has 5 levels of downsizing by category, starting with your clothes. But she's like, take all of your clothes out of all of your closets and drawers and put them in a big pile and hold each one up and say, does this spark joy? Does this item bring me joy? Well, when you're talking about clothes, not only does it make you feel good, does it make you look good? Does it still fit? Is it in any kind of, does it need repair? So you need to decide, you know, if you haven't worn something in years, usually I think it's, if you haven't worn it in 2 years, maybe it's time to let it go. So clothing is her first category. And then books are the next category. Oh, books, people love their books. you know, taking all of the books off of all of the shelves and looking through them. And, you know, if you're not going to read it again, or maybe you know somebody else could benefit from this book, great way to lighten your load is to think of who could benefit from this object and pass it along that way. Then it's manga, you know, newspapers, magazines, things like that, more sentimental objects. And then the most sentimental of all, photographs. Oh my God. I am not without sin. I have a giant drawer right over here in my office that is full of photographs. And I have yet to tackle and downsize that. But even when it comes to photographs, it's pretty easy to get rid of, you know, the blurry ones, the ones that you've got multiples of. And again, that might be a case of passing it on to somebody else who would appreciate those photographs. I have a girlfriend who did that to me. She sent me a bunch of photos of us from the 1980s, and I was like, oh. So, and then, of course, there is what I call the nuclear option, which is have an estate sale while you're still alive. I actually went to an estate sale where this couple had decided to move to Austin, Texas, by the way. So Nancy, I don't know if you would know them, but I don't even know their names. But what they did was they just basically packed a suitcase of whatever current clothing they wear and put their house up for sale with all the contents. And this was starting life anew, light, and in a whole new place. So, so that's your nuclear option. And let me just share with you a few ideas about getting rid of things. I love this photo. This is me donating that fancy sombrero to the waitress at an Albuquerque restaurant here called El Serape, where they decorate with colorful serapes and sombreros. And I went there while I was writing the Kicking the Bucket List book, and I noticed, oh, they decorate with fancy sombreros. I bought that sombrero at a yard sale in Washington, D.C., and by this time I had probably had it for 25 to 30 years, basically hanging on a wall, collecting dust. You know, I like the pattern of it, but I'm not going to wear that anywhere. So I decided when I went to this restaurant, oh, the next time we come here, I'm going to bring the sombrero and just give it to them and say they can decorate with it. And so I did. I said, I'd like to give you the sombrero. And they're like, oh, thank you very much. And they gave me a free flan for dessert. So that was great. And I did have this picture taken just so I could, you know, have the memory of the sombrero. I had a pair of white leather roller skates, you know, the roller skate shoes that I had since high school. And I only just got rid of those probably about the same time I got rid of the sombrero, but I took a picture of them before I let them go. So that's one way to help let go of those things. Now, there are many great ways that you can pass along your unwanted material goods. You know, whether you should keep it, you know, if it's a document that, you know, is going to be required for your taxes or your birth certificate or you know, your home mortgage or your home, maybe you paid off your home, yay. So there are important papers that you need to hold on to. But then there are other papers, it's like, why are you holding on to them? You can let them go. And I have to say, I am not without sin. I still have every calendar, those you know, week a day or weekly calendars. Now I have page a day calendars. I save my calendars because it's very interesting when you look back, if you actually look at a calendar like that, at least for myself, I find I remember that day or that event. much more clearly when you see it in writing, in your own handwriting. But for example, you can sell things. Now, I'm not a big fan of holding garage sales, yard sales, tag sales, whatever you want to call them, because even though you've recognized that you want to get rid of this object, you're still probably attached to it in some way, because when you put it out there on your driveway with a price tag on it and somebody wants to give you 10 cents on the dollar for it, you're going to be offended, and it's just emotionally draining to do these things. So why not give the stuff away? I mean, you can make money with some of your bigger items. For example, when my in-laws downsized from a home to an assisted living facility, they had a brand new natural gas grill that had been on their patio, and they gave it to my husband and I. Well, that sat on our patio for about a year. And then I realized, you know, if we're going to use this, we need to have a gas line run to our backyard. And we already had a propane grill, which worked perfectly well. So I was like, let's sell this. And I looked up the value of a new unit, and oh my God, it was like $800. We couldn't sell it for that much, but between that and a rooftop carrier that had been in our garage for going on 10 years and I hadn't used it, we made $750 with those two items selling it through Craigslist. Craigslist is a great resource for selling those kind of things. You could also donate to qualified charities. This is, you know, Goodwill, Habitat for Humanity, your local library society. So, you know, right there, you know, between clothes, books and DVDs, CDs, your library will take those and then turn around and sell them to support the library. You can also do a, with the Habitat for Humanity folks, they'll take tools, building materials, appliances that still work. If you're remodeling and taking out old cabinets that are still in good shape, they'll take those. So there are a lot of ways you can just give items away, and it removes that emotional disconnect when you're trying to sell your goods, and you're really offended when people only want to give you just a pittance for all that great stuff. So it's easier to give it away. And when you give to a qualified charity, you can reduce, take the value that you assign to those pieces off on your taxes as a donation. So wonderful way to do that. You can also put stuff out on your sidewalk with a free sign, depending on where you live. I actually had some luck with that. There is a website called freecycle.org where you can list things that you want to give away for free. So a number of different ways to go. Do you have any comments or other suggestions that you'd like to pipe in with, or questions? All right. So let's assume.
Oh, I do.
Okay.
It's not really giving you another resource. It's just that, like in my heart of hearts, things that are dear to me, I have all this cobalt blue dinnerware that I just loved for years. But then I realized if I got white dinnerware, I could just keep switching placemats. So I'm ready to let the cobalt blue stuff go. But do you know, there's a part of me that I want to give it, just like the way you gave away the sombrero. I would love to see the people that take it that love cobalt blue as much as I do. as opposed to giving it, say, to a resale store and people kind of buy it up piecemeal, this, that, and the other thing. It's like, oh, there's just got to be a young couple out there just setting up home. And imagine having this dinnerware given to them. It would be terrific. So, but that ends up being an excuse as to why that dinnerware is still sitting in a discreet corner of my living room floor.
Well, what you might try doing is just mention that you would give this away to a couple that's setting up their new home. Or there is a foundation, and I'm blanking on the name at the moment, that will set up an apartment fully furnished for homeless families.
Mhm.
And then once they're able to move out and go out on their own, they get to take all the household goods with them.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's not coming to mind at the moment, but I'll let you know what that is. I'll follow up with you on that later.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Gail.
So let's assume you have downsized all of the excess stuff in your life. Now, I love this image because it looks like it's a princess who is receiving all sorts of tributes. There's the guy who's kneeling with a giant egg, the person standing behind him holding a flowering plant. That person behind that, next in line has a live ram on a leash, and then the woman behind at the back of the line has some kind of panel with writing on it. We don't know exactly why these people are giving her these objects. And if you don't talk about the objects that you have decided to hold on to, it will be just as mysterious to your loved ones if they don't know the story of your treasured items before you fall off the face of the planet. So talk about your stuff. Maybe write the history of these objects to put them on, and that would be the next tip, which is labeling objects. Either labeling or talking about where this came from, why it's special to you. Does it have family history? In my family, there's this samovar. You know what a samovar is? It's an urn that has a chimney in the middle of it. And they were very popular in Russia. In the old country, you would have this samovar in your kitchen. So you had hot water on demand. It had a little spigot at the bottom. Well, my family has this samovar, which I had in my possession for a number of years, but then I have no children to pass this family heirloom on to. So I got it back into my parents' possession so that we can figure out what to do with it whenever they pass on. My parents are 90 years old and still going strong. So hooray for that. But that's just one example of, which branch of the family did it come from and how did it get here? There are stories in my family of, going by ox cart under cover of night to escape the Russian Tsar. So that's tied to that. So when an object has that kind of family history and that kind of stories behind it, you don't want those to get lost. Otherwise, it just becomes all of these interesting objects, but we don't know the meaning behind them. Now, one other thing about labeling objects, you can write the significance of a painting and how much it cost when you bought it or what it might be valued at, because you don't want things going into that yard sale that could be worth thousands of dollars and somebody picks it up for 10. So labeling objects is another good way to go. Now, some people talk about labeling objects as a way to pass on those objects when they're gone. But there is a better way to do this because labels can fall off of objects. In your will, there is a part of the will that can be a handwritten list that says, my cowboy boot collection goes to my friend Evie, or whatever. And you sign and you date that list and you attach it to your will. That is the legally binding way to pass along objects rather than just putting a label on it and saying so-and-so gets this. And by the way, I am not an attorney, so don't consider my advice official attorney advice. That would not be correct. So now we're getting into more of the preparing for end of life activities. So think about how many passwords and usernames you have in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, it can be mind-boggling. I mean, not only do you have, if you do online banking, your credit cards, your social media, your email, your news media use, your travel. There are so many usernames and passwords in our lives. I myself find that making a spreadsheet on paper, with an Excel spreadsheet, is really the best way for me to help remember. And in fact, I just pulled it out twice today to look up passwords. If you die and nobody knows your passwords, your family is going to have a really hard time shutting down your online life. Now, there are services where you can use a one master password, and then they would keep the rest of your online usernames and passwords in a virtual lockbox. I'm kind of nervous about that because it seems like everything's getting hacked these days. So listing your online passwords is a great way to, and let people know, keep it with your important papers for when you're gone so that people know if there is an account that has like a monthly or an annual fee. If your credit card is going to get charged on a regular basis, it will continue to get charged unless somebody shuts that account down. But they can't shut it down if they don't know about it. So that's another reason to have online passwords listed and keep it updated. I have a habit of on Thanksgiving, when the parade is on and the dog show, I will sit there and update my Excel spreadsheet. Very often over the course of the year, I'll just handwrite changes because there are those websites that will make you change your password every 3 months. So it is one of those aspects of our modern life that we need to keep organized and find a way to share with our loved ones so that when we are no longer here, they'll know what needs to be shut down. Okay, healthcare power of attorney, naming somebody to speak on your behalf should you be in a medical situation where you cannot speak for yourself. Now, this really gets close to people's mortality, and this is one reason why a lot of people don't have a healthcare power of attorney, because you have to think about nasty things like, would I want to be put on a ventilator? And this is why this pandemic has brought mortality issues so top of mind for so many people. It has, in fact, prompted a number of people to set up their wills, set up their healthcare advanced medical directives. But a lot of people go the opposite direction, and they just want to ignore the fact that, yes, we are going to die, and then, yeah, probably we'll be in the hospital before then. So this healthcare power of attorney would be somebody who knows what your wishes are. Do you want to be kept alive as long as humanly possible, even if that could be a painful experience? Do you want to be revived should your heart stop beating? Do you want liquid or hydration and nutrition, artificial hydration and nutrition? Tube feeding is, what it's often called. Now, naming that person is not an easy thing to do because number one, you don't want to surprise somebody and say, by the way, you're my healthcare power of attorney. You want to have a conversation with that person and let them know, I do or do not want heroic measures taken to extend my life. Now, I bring up that heroic measures idea because this is what happened in my own family. My father-in-law, Norm, was 82 when he fell and broke his hip. Now, this man had had 3 open heart surgeries in his lifetime. And after his 3rd surgery, he was in a coma for 10 days. When he came out of the coma, his doctor said, you better get your affairs in order. So he did have an advanced medical directive. He did financial and estate planning. He hadn't done funeral planning, though, and I helped take care of that for him, and we'll talk about that later. But his wife, my mother-in-law, Myra, was his named healthcare power of attorney. And Norm went through 7 weeks of a downhill slide after breaking his hip. On the 3rd ER admission with trouble breathing, they said, we don't think we can fix this, because basically he was inhaling anything he ate or drank. And they said, we can admit him on palliative care. He'll get very good care, we'll make him comfortable, and we'll let nature take its course. And my mother-in-law, who had a vested interest in keeping Norm alive as long as possible, did not want to make that decision because that meant Norm was going to die. So she turned to my husband, who was the second in line, and his wife, the Doyenne of death, and we said palliative care is a really good thing. Let's do that. And the reason we knew that we could do this with confidence is that Norm's advanced medical directive said no heroic measures. And that would be the tube feeding, the CPR to revive you and things like that, even putting them on a ventilator. So he was hospitalized, had very good care, trying to relieve the breathing issue. And on the 7th day, he died with all of the immediate family around him, and it was a beautiful passing. And I tell you that story because your healthcare power of attorney needs to know what you want when it comes to this kind of healthcare at whatever age. Starting at age 18, people need healthcare power of attorney, and to write out what your wishes are, and to revisit that every 3 to 5 years, because a lot can change in 3 to 5 years, including who your POA would be in case they move out of town. We also have the idea of a financial power of attorney. This is somebody who can do financial transactions on your behalf while you are still alive. For example, I have a friend named Beth who came from Iowa, corn and pig country, and her father had a brain bleed, which put him in the intensive care unit. Her father was a corn farmer who wanted to sell the corn right before he had this medical emergency, and it put him in the hospital. He could not sell his corn while he was in the intensive care unit. He was still awake, but he was not able to access his investment person to take care of a financial transaction. he hadn't made either of his daughters financial power of attorney. So not being able to sell the corn when the price was at its peak, that's a problem. On the other hand, if you have a financial power of attorney, another elderly friend of mine, a gentleman, had pneumonia, put him in the hospital for a week and then in a rehab facility for many weeks to recover. Well, his bills were piling up. Who's going to pay your bills while you're out of commission? Because he had a financial power of attorney, she was able to write the checks to take care of the bills while he was recovering. Now, the part about financial power of attorney is this power goes away when you die. And then it becomes the job of your executor. Now, I love this picture of the little kid in the big chair because so many people select their executor based on, well, it's one of my children. But you know, you really need to have an executor who has a number of specific skills and is trustworthy. This person is your fiduciary. They are going to be carrying out financial transactions on your behalf. So you don't just want to pick out somebody who's a relative just because. It is a big job to be an executor. You're the person as the executor who is going to file the final tax return for the deceased. They may be dealing with court filings if it has to go through probate court. They may be selling the car or other properties on your behalf. So they need to keep organized records and detailed notes about all the time spent settling your estate because they can get paid to do this job. You can either bill the estate hourly or as a percentage of the value of the estate. And there is also the option, if you don't have an executor in your life, a family member or a friend who would be trustworthy, that you could work with a bank. Banks have trust divisions, and that's all they do is take care of the estates of people who name them in their wills or trusts to be it could be the first choice or the second choice. So if you've got an executor who, like my husband and I, we picked a friend of ours to be our executor. And he moved away to California a couple of years ago. And that's when we said, guess it's time to update our wills. And in fact, you should check and update your will every 3 to 5 years because things change. People get married, get divorced, people die, people are born. And depending on what you want your material assets that you have left after all of your downsizing, as well as your financial assets, you want to make sure that your paperwork is reflective, current to the current situations. And of course, all of this rests on the idea that you're going to prepare a valid will or trust. And really, all you need for that is to be at least 18 years of age, of sound mind. And if you have minor children, you want to nominate an adult to be their guardian until they come of age. Now, a trust is a legal document that can be set up so that all of your assets can easily transfer without going through probate court. And as I mentioned, I'm not a lawyer, so that's about all I'm going to say about wills and trusts. But do know that if you die without a will, the state that you die in will have a line of succession for people to inherit your earthly goods. And they may not be the people that you want to see get your goods. So it's important to have a will that is valid, that would supersede the state's transfer of your goods according to who they think you should be passing your stuff along to. So this is a very complex issue. I mean, there are online sites where you can get will templates that can be personalized for your particular state and situation. My advice, though, is to talk to an estate planning attorney in your state who knows the ins and outs, and spend a little money to get the right kind of paperwork done for your situation. Who's got pets? Oh. My husband and I, we have 2 black cats that came from the Humane Society, and as part of our, we actually do have a trust, and part of that is a pet trust where we have stated our wishes, should our cats outlive us, that we would return them to the Humane Society with a generous donation and the cat's medical paperwork, so that they know what's up with the cats. And you can ask 1 person, 2 people, even a 3rd choice person to be your pet trust administrator. Somebody who would take your animal, should you predecease it, and provide some funding to take care of it. So we definitely want to take care of our lovely pets. And think about this, if you got like an African gray parrot, those birds live 50, 60 years. So you would definitely want to provide for a very long-lived bird as well. Who's this guy?
Prince.
Prince, yes. Well, it's actually a very lifelike wax museum, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum version of Prince. But Prince, as many of you may know, died unexpectedly of an overdose at the age of 57. Well, this guy's a rock star with many, many hits that produce lots of royalty income every single year. Not only that, he also owned property in Minneapolis, which can generate income if you have rental properties. If you're an author who has books out there that continue selling and generate income that way, this is going to keep going after you're dead. So how will your estate handle any royalty income that keeps coming in after your death? That's another aspect to consider as part of your estate planning. Oh, and oil and gas leases. I don't know anybody who owns an oil or gas lease, but they do generate income. Now, most people know who this guy is. Albert Einstein did not have to write his own obituary, but us mere mortals who aren't known necessarily for outstanding achievements in science or arts or anything, we are individuals, though, who have our own life stories. We have our passions. We have our proud moments. We have our contributions to humanity. But if we don't tell our own story, who's going to know? Maybe your family knows where you were born, where you went to school, your relatives, but there is so much more to your life story. So I'm encouraging you to think about writing your own obituary and making it all about what you feel makes life special and life worth living. And by the way, I do want to also mention that you want to avoid putting specific details in an obituary in the newspaper. Those details, as shocking as this may sound, are your date of birth, the date of death, your place of birth, and your mother's maiden name. Because ID theft, ID thieves can take those 4 details and create a whole new person based on your information and go on a ID theft spree. So there are ways of communicating where you're from, maybe your age, without revealing those kind of details that can result in ID theft. So you do want to be aware of that and avoid those kind of details. Shop before you drop. One of the things about funeral planning, you know, people think it's morbid. If I go and do this, it's going to happen sooner. No, this is a huge consumer issue. Funerals are very expensive, and many people have no concept what they're paying for. You know, Nancy, the Funeral Consumers Alliance is, you know, certainly a good friend for all funeral consumers about getting educated about funeral costs. I think part of the problem that people have is that they get sticker shock when they are faced with funeral expenses, and nobody has taken the time to investigate those expenses before somebody dies. So don't wait until somebody's on their deathbed. Shop before you drop. Nancy, did you have something you wanted to add about that?
I just want to say a perfect example of that in the Austin area right now. Just a simple cremation without any services before or after that the funeral home is involved in costs anywhere from $595 to over $4,000 for exactly the same thing.
It's a huge difference, absolutely, yeah. And unless you shop around, you're not going to know that. So as I said, it is a consumer issue. And know what you want. And, you know, part of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic has been, even if you want to have a funeral, in many cases, depending on the status of your state, as far as I know, currently, as of the end of June, most funerals are limited to 10 people in person, spaced 6 feet apart. Many funeral homes are offering video streaming of memorial services so people can zoom in like we're doing here. Or if it's a burial at graveside, people can also have video of that service shared over the internet, either live or after the fact. But there's been a huge impact on what a funeral service looks like currently, and we don't know for how long this is going to be in place. I've seen a number of obituaries that say a gathering will be held later, and nobody knows how much later will be. So something to think about. Speaking of sooner or later, use hospice sooner rather than later. A lot of people,
Gail, I
yeah.
just want to interrupt to say how much I've appreciated this and to say goodbye to everybody because I have another webinar I have to go to.
Oh, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, it was
I'll
great.
be able to post the rest of it, and you can watch it as a video later.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
So many of you may know that hospice is a Medicare benefit where somebody who is diagnosed with a illness that will kill them within 6 months or less. But a lot of people have avoided using hospice because of that idea that, well, if I go on hospice, that means I'm going to die. Well, we are all going to die, we just don't know when. Hospice provides so many great benefits. It allows somebody to die at home comfortable, surrounded by their family. Now, families do wind up doing a great amount of the caregiving work, but hospice nurses and doctors come to the house. There's spiritual support, social worker support to help make this transition the best that it can be. And I have only good things to say about hospice, and hope to encourage more people to use it, because the statistics as to when people go on hospice, it's shocking. Most people go on hospice 3 to 10 days before they die, when they could be on it for 6 months or even longer. And there are studies that show that people who choose hospice over aggressive care approaching end of life, the people who choose hospice actually live longer and better lives in the time that they have left. So very important consideration.
Gail, may I say something about that?
Yes.
We also have the option, people should think about and describe the type of hospice or end of life setting that they wanted. At a Before You Die event, I was able to do just that. And we found that some people in the room doing this exercise, they would want to be in the living room with lots of people around, people coming and going. And others of us, we want to avoid that. No one will know. And if you are not able to speak for yourself, people will do what makes them comfortable, and it might be the exact opposite of what you want. One dear fellow wants his deathbed to be decorated with disco balls and, the village people playing in the background and stuff like that. So again, plan sooner, not later.
Yes. One of the slides from the book that I don't have in this presentation is about the 5 wishes form, which is a great form to fill out, where you can spell out those kind of wishes for how you want your end of life deathbed scene to look like, or sound like, or smell like. It's funny, one of the wishes is about how I wish to be treated in my final days. And one of them is, I'd like to be massaged with warm oils as often as possible. My advice is, don't wait until you're dying to get a good massage. All right. Another aspect to all of this end of life planning that a lot of people don't think about, because funerals can be so expensive, there are different financing options. So let's say you're looking at least $3,000 to $10,000 for, even if you're doing direct cremation, maybe you want to have a party afterwards. So, food and drink costs, having it in a meaningful location might cost money, getting all the party supplies, etc. So if you've got $3,000 to $10,000 sitting in the bank, easily accessible, that's great. You can actually make a payable on death account where the beneficiary can get that money without having to wait to go through probate, and make the arrangements for your memorial service. And hopefully they won't take the money and go to Mexico. Now, another option is a credit card. Most funeral homes do take credit cards. Think of the points, the miles, but also think of, do people have that much available credit on their cards? If you don't pay your card off every month, you might not. This is where insurance options come in. I am licensed to sell insurance in the state of New Mexico. And one of the aspects to think about are you talking about burial insurance, which is a small policy anywhere from $3,000 to $35,000 that can pay your final expenses for the funeral, the burial if you're being buried. for the party, for outstanding medical expenses. Or if you pre-plan with a funeral home and pick out the casket you want and the kind of service you want, and you make all the decisions yourself and prepay for it, in most states, you're either putting that money in a trust account or in an insurance policy. That means that the money is still within your control, because if you move from where you live, that funeral home is no longer available to you, but you can take that insurance policy and present it at a different funeral home and be able to access the money in that policy for the funeral services. What most funeral homes will do is, if you do get an insurance policy that pays for the arrangements, they promise to lock in today's prices on what they control, the casket, their services. But things outside of their control, like the cost of an obituary, or maybe the motorcycle police escort, if you were going to have a procession from one place to another. By the way, I highly recommend the police escort. When my father-in-law Norm died, and we went from the synagogue to the cemetery, that police escort, they stop traffic and help control the flow of things. They are so, so needed. And then if you already have like a big life insurance policy, like, $500,000 to support the family's finances, that is an option where when you go to the funeral home and they know that there's this big insurance policy, but the policy can take months to pay off, there will be what's called an assignment. A third-party fiduciary pays the funeral home knowing that the insurance policy will pay off eventually. And then when it does pay off, that third party gets paid back plus a percentage of what they paid to the funeral home. So that's a quick overview of funeral financing options. And then you want to make your funeral plans. So many people don't even talk about whether they want cremation or burial. If they want cremation, what do they want done with the remains? I just went up to the top of Sandia Mountain on Sunday with the cremated remains of an old boyfriend who died in 2018. I moved to New Mexico with Pete Goodwin in 1990 because he wanted to move here and I wanted to move here. We'd come out here on vacation the previous summer together. Well, we didn't work out as a couple, but we stayed friends. And he left. He went to Oklahoma and helped take care of his aging parents. After they died, he went to Texas and spent a number of years there. He met and married a wonderful woman named Lucy. Well, Pete died, actually had liver failure at not very old. He was 68, I want to say. And I went to his memorial service. And there, Lucy told me that Pete said he wanted his ashes scattered on Sandia Mountain. And I promised that I would do that for her. And I got to do that. I went to Austin, which is near New Braunfels, where Pete used to live, got his ashes from Lucy, and I put most of them in an ossuary in Sunset Memorial Park here in Albuquerque. They have a great deal where they have something called Scatter Day, where anybody who's got cremated remains in their home could bring them and give them a final resting place. So I did that for Pete because I didn't want to go schlepping up to the crest anytime I wanted to say howdy. So it feels good to know what somebody wants. At least 20% of households have somebody's cremated remains sitting around the house.
Huh?
And that, true, yeah. And that is not permanent. You know, if that person moves or dies and somebody discovers somebody else's cremated remains, they don't know who that person is necessarily, or have any kind of connection to it. So even if you're choosing cremation, choose and talk about what you would want done with those remains, uh, because just cremating is not the end of the line. Hey, let's talk about trends like green burials and home funerals. One of the things that I like to tell people is that Jewish burial is the closest you can get to green burial in a conventional cemetery, because there's no embalming. The body is dressed in cotton or linen clothing and placed in usually a plain pine box, but wicker basket caskets or bamboo are also biodegradable and acceptable as long as there are no metal parts. And the body is put in contact with the earth. Now, in a conventional cemetery, they'll require a liner, either a heavy-duty plastic box or concrete liner, to keep the ground from settling as everything decomposes. There are a number of green burial grounds throughout the United States now. That's something that's really grown up over the past 10 years. And the Green Burial Council, which you can look up online, has a listing by state of green burial grounds where people can be buried as naturally as possible. Can minimize your carbon footprint as part of your end-of-life plans. And home funerals are another growing trend. There is the National Home Funeral Alliance, which got started in the past 10 years as well, with guides who can help advise families on how to hold on to the body in your home, washing and dressing the body. You know, it used to be that every burial was a green burial and every funeral was a home funeral until the beginning of the 20th century, when the funeral director and embalming became the preferred choice for people of taking funerals out of the home. But there have been a number of films, documentaries lately that talk about this idea of having a home funeral, encountering our own dead. I am a member of the Hever Kadisha, which is the Jewish Burial Society. In the Muslim tradition, both religions have a ritual called the Tahara, which means purification. It's washing and dressing the body for burial, and there are prayers that are said while it's done. It's a very sacred time, and it always makes me appreciate being alive when I'm done. So this is something that can be done within most states. I think I can't name the states off of the top of my head where you have to have a funeral home involved, but there's only about 7 states. And even then, there are times when you could have a funeral home provide the transportation if you don't have a big enough vehicle to take a body to be buried or to a crematory. Or they could handle the filing of the paperwork for you, you know, the death certificate and the registration of the death and the burial transit permit. These are all parts of what a funeral home provides. So there are hybrid ways of doing it mostly yourself, but also having the help of a funeral home. How to get a free cremation. So this is what a fire-based retort looks like. The retort is the oven where they put the body in that door and crank up the heat. You can donate your body to science. My number one choice would be if you have a medical school at a university in your town, is to make arrangements for anatomical donation with the university. But you have to do that yourself while you're alive and of sound mind. Now, if the university doesn't have space in the morgue, or if you've got a condition, either grossly overweight or grossly underweight, or you have a communicable disease, HIV, AIDS, the hepatitis, any of the hepatitises. I'm not sure if they count COVID or not. They may at this point. They can turn down your donation for having a communicable disease or severe trauma to the body. So if a university winds up turning down your body donation, well, if they do accept it, they would hold on to the body for up to 2 years and then cremate the remains and return them to the family or scatter them in a ceremony. There are national body donation services that work with local funeral homes to collect the body, take it into their care. They do with it whatever they do with it, but I got to tell you, they could be selling body parts. And that's, something to know about. And I do have a link on my website to a series by Reuters that talks about the body trade business. You might want to read that before you decide to sign up for donating your body. But either of those, either through the university or these national services, is a way to get a free cremation and a death certificate without paying anything. One of the other elements about this is if you get turned down by both the university and the body donation services, which can happen, you do want to find out about the way, the cheapest cremation in your local market. And by the way, there is a online website called funeralocity.com, which does comparisons of funeral home price lists. And they do keep updating the price lists by market. And that's a great resource for researching the different funeral home prices. Make a personal contact list. This is sort of going back to my start as a event planner, where you've got this party that no one wants to plan. And when somebody dies, you need to be able to get in touch with your guest list pretty quickly. Now, it used to be we had mom's dog-eared personal phone book, right? In a drawer in the kitchen or maybe in the den, where all the family and friends, you had their phone number and their address. Well, now what we have is our smartphones that have contact lists. And as I indicated earlier with the spreadsheet of passwords, you might want to make a spreadsheet of your personal contacts, the family members, the friends, who are these people, even work people or clubs you belong to. Because when somebody dies, it used to be, okay, let's put an obituary in the newspaper, but not a lot of people are reading newspapers anymore. So there are a number of different ways to get in touch with people. There is a service that was started recently in the past couple of years, called Everdays, Everdays, which is an app that you could put on your own cell phone and use it to access the people you want to contact on your contact list with a notification of someone's death and the arrangements for the funeral service. There are a number of funeral homes that are using this app now to also connect themselves with the family of the deceased and all of their contacts. So, but they still, as far as I know, allow individuals to use that app for their own communications, irrespective of the funeral home. Or you could do, the paper-based thing. I did create a document suite called the Family Plot File, where you can put your contact information into a spreadsheet and then output it as labels or phone lists or other paper-based contact information, even mailing labels. And that's on my website, agoodgoodbye.com. We're almost there. We're down to number 2. Talk to your family. Like I said earlier, talking about sex won't make you pregnant. Talking about funerals and end-of-life issues won't make you dead. We have so many ways to have the conversation now, and there are tools out there to make it easier. For talking about your medical wishes, there's the Conversation Project. They provide tools that make it easy to talk about medical wishes for whenever the time comes that somebody's going to be at the hospital. You'll have those wishes already written down, discussed, known about. Talk about your life. The National Funeral Directors Association put together a deck of cards called Have the Talk of a Lifetime. And those are like great conversation starting question cards about, what was the high point of your life, the lowest point, how'd you meet your wife or your husband? Just all kinds of great conversation starting prompts. And talk about your stuff. As part of this book, the Kicking the Bucket List book, I offer a 50-point executor's checklist. And in fact, you can download that from my website, agoodgoodbye.com, which details a number of the aspects of shutting down an estate so that you know what you need to do to be prepared before somebody dies to make it easier to handle the shutting down of an estate. And you might want to check into any of the many death cafes that are going on around the world. Deathcafe.com is a website where you can go and look up your local area to see if there are any death cafes going on where you can go talk about mortality issues. And back to number 1, enjoy your life. So all of this discussion of mortality makes us more aware of the need to appreciate every single day. This importance of being present in the present moment. As we said with the Buddha, all we have is this present moment. So make the most of every day. And remember, the one who dies with the most toys still dies. Do you have any questions I can answer? I can get out of these. And I so appreciate you being with us for the whole presentation, this part of the Reimagine virtual festival. And if you don't have any questions, we can just wrap it up here.
Not a question. I just wanted to say thank you, not only for your time today, but for all the work you've done to bring this out into the world for everyone. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Pat. I really appreciate that. And we will be posting this video of this discussion, this presentation on YouTube. So it will be available that you can access it through my YouTube channel, and it will live on in perpetuity.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Let me just leave you with this thought. One of the books that I did, Hail and Farewell, Cremation Ceremonies, Templates and Tips, and has a number of readings in it, including a letter that Benjamin Franklin wrote to a friend of his as he was getting up in years and he was going to a number of funerals. And Benjamin Franklin wrote this: "We are spirits. that bodies should be lent us while they can assist us in acquiring knowledge, in pursuing pleasure, and in doing good to our fellow creatures is a kind and benevolent act of God. When our bodies become unfit for these purposes and afford us pain instead of pleasure, instead of an aid, become an encumbrance, and answer none of the intentions for which they were given, it is equally kind and benevolent that a way is provided by which we may get rid of them. Death is that way. Our friend and we are invited abroad on a party of pleasure that is to last forever. His chair was ready first, and he is gone before us. We could not all conveniently start together. And why should you and I be grieved at this, since we are soon to follow and know where to find him? My friends, just like talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals and end-of-life issues won't make you dead. Start a conversation today.